He's muted. Are you muted?
Hey Mike, we're at quorum, but I might just give it a minute here. I've had some people kind of leaking in, joining. Can I get a thumbs up that someone can hear us? Nobody can hear us?
Somebody can hear us?
Okay, Kurt, I'm not sure anyone can hear us.
Okay,
Everything looks blue on my end, and we've got no...
oh, try on the screen, physically hit the unmute button. See that?
Already, we
We
are...
did.
Yeah, that's unmuted, and neither
Yeah,
stuff's
I'm not
unmuted.
getting your computer audio, that's really weird. Okay,
Is it the 6E6? Is that?
no, those are on me, and I can hear you guys, but I can tell your folks cannot.
Yeah,
And
I think anyone else can.
click on the bottom right of your Windows screen and make sure the speaker is set to Logitech noise canceling something on the speaker icon.
Set to echo canceling speakerphone.
Yep. Okay.
We go to these
Video settings?
audio settings.
Audio?
That's both
And just go ahead and hit like test speaker and see if anything
test
comes up.
mic,
Yeah,
test mic. Getting nothing.
Okay, what about test speaker? Is anything playing back? Top left or whatever.
Oh.
Speaker works.
Okay.
and audio's coming from, but I think that with some combination of my phone and what we got going on in the room, we should be able to hear. So can someone talk? Mike, can you talk?
Yes, this is Mike Wazikowski, PTAC Chair. Everyone hear me? I hope so.
Okay, everyone there's nodding.
Okay.
I think that'll work.
Okay. Well, in that event, I'm going to call this meeting to order at 4:18. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Serena, could you go through a roll call, please?
Oh, I'm just trying to dial into the meeting. All right. This is Serena Pearson, Lawrence Transit. Go through roll call. Lance Fahey. I don't believe he's here. Right? Logan Stewart?
Here.
Mike Wazikowski is here. Nick Kuzmiak?
Here.
Alan Ackland?
Here.
Natalie Yoza? No? Bill Wilson? August Rudisell?
Here.
Freddie Gibb?
Here.
Okay. We have 6 present and 3 absent. We have a quorum.
Okay, that constitutes a forum, so we
Yes.
have an official meeting then. Thank you, everyone, for being in attendance. First item on the agenda is public comments. Adam, did we receive any written public comments?
We have not received any written public comment, and there is no one here in the commission room with us.
Okay. Is there anyone on the line who would like to provide public comments? My guess is no. Okay. Hearing none, then I will assume we have no public comments for this meeting. We'll proceed to approval of minutes. I would like to note before we begin this that I'm going to be following the current standard in Robert's Rules of Order for approving minutes, which is that I will provide everyone sufficient time to review the minutes and state that they have objections and corrections to the minutes. And then following 3 requests of are there any further amendments to the minutes, they will be deemed approved by unanimous consent. That will avoid us having to go through a roll call on the votes. This is standard means in Robert's Rules of Order. So I hope everyone reviewed the minutes from last meeting. They are posted on the agenda.
Nick Kuzmiak, PTAC. The only small thing I found is that one of the instances of my name is not spelled right, but I mean, I can take it or leave it.
I believe I had noticed that as well. I don't remember exactly where it was. Under section E2 other items, there is an extra L, I believe, in his last name.
Okay.
Are there any further amendments? Any further amendments? Okay. Seeing no further amendments, we have approved the minutes by unanimous consent. Everyone has voted yes. Thank you, everyone. We'll now proceed on to the first agenda item, cart policy discussion. Adam, I'm guessing you have a set of slides to review
I still need to go through.
with us.
Yes, but I will, I'm going to turn it back over to Serena just to read the rules and protocol for this meeting.
Very well. Thank you.
Okay, this is Serena Pearson, Marketing Specialist, Lawrence Transit. I'm here with Adam Weigel, and we'll work to facilitate the meeting proceedings. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and public access cable channel 25. During the meeting, when you're not participating, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand side of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you're muted, a red line will appear over the icon. Muting your microphone during the meeting will make it easier for everyone to hear. You'll just have to remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. In some cases, we may mute or unmute people as needed to minimize distractions during the meeting. Please remember to state your name and title for the benefit of those listening remotely. You can turn your video on and off by clicking the video icon on the menu. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on when you're participating in the meeting. When you're not participating, it's okay to turn your video off. Just remember to turn your video back on when you're participating. If you are participating by phone, you can click *6 to unmute your phone. For those using Zoom, somewhere on your screen you will see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all the meeting participants. And now I will turn the meeting back over to our PTAC chair, Mike Wazakowski.
Thank you. And now back to discussion of the cart policy. Adam?
This is Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. So, wanted to bring a discussion around cart policy to you all, partially based on my own experience riding the bus, but then we also got comments recently from one or two riders who had some challenges with using carts and the way that we have our policy set up. So let me screen share and I'll walk through some of this. Okay, so we'll walk through how the cart policy currently works for us, what the different pieces of it are. What we've noticed are challenges with how we currently have things set up. We've got some ideas on changes that we think might improve how this functions, but we are looking for your thoughts and feedback on any changes we might make to this. So this policy is in our ride guide, so in the printed materials that people use to find routes and schedule information. In general, it's a policy that prohibits any large items that would either block the aisle or require someone to use additional bus seats, with the purpose of this being that we're trying to keep the bus as accessible as possible and as safe as possible, so keeping aisles clear, keeping contents from spilling or being loose while the bus is traveling. Those are some of the reasons this policy was born out of. So some of the practical pieces of this is that personal carts or strollers, we ask patrons to fold and store them or hold them out of the aisleway. If they are full of items, we ask that people remove those items before folding up carts. For people that are grocery shopping, any grocery bags that they have, we ask that they store them either in their lap or under a seat, and not to use any additional seats when grocery shopping with the bus. Lastly, just for safety reasons, this is a little bit of a judgment call for bus operators, but the guidance that any items, larger items that someone has, must be reasonably controlled by them and not left to spill or fall over for safety reasons on the bus. So some challenges to this are, and this was partly my experience as well, someone brings a cart onto the bus with groceries, asking that person to take items out can actually create more of a safety challenge than if they were to leave them in a cart. And it certainly takes time for a person to do that when the driver will need to wait until that person safely unloaded the cart, stored their cart, and then has sat down to move the bus forward. There are a couple components that just don't leave a lot of options for passengers. So we're asking people to remove items from a cart, but also not to place bags or other items on adjacent seats to prevent other people from sitting down. So that just leaves pretty limited options if you've got more items than can fit in your lap or under a seat. And I think frequently when people grocery shop, they're likely to have more than just a couple bags with them. So just thinking about how we can make the bus as practical as possible for people to use in their daily lives. The way we currently enforce this policy and the bounds around it just make grocery shopping or traveling with children in strollers just less practical, and it makes it more challenging for people. My personal experience in other cities, as well as talking with some other staff members, is that in other systems, oftentimes this can be less strict application of this rule, where certainly if a cart is blocking accessibility or preventing someone in a wheelchair from getting secured in the space they need to, or preventing somebody from sitting down in a seat when they really need to sit down. Under certain circumstances, the driver will ask or request that passengers, move their stuff out of the way to accommodate those accessibility concerns. But just having a little more deference, I guess, to the drivers in determining when to enforce it, when to ask people just to move it out of the way. I went out to our facility to walk through some of these challenges with a bus driver, and we just took some photos of different things that, different circumstances that are not allowed under current policy. So this is the cart that I would use to shop with. Starting with the left picture, in this instance, trying to move the cart next to me so that it's out of the aisle. That still blocks those two forward-facing seats that you see in the background, so that technically is against our policy. Middle picture, that violates current policy because it blocks the aisleway. Picture on the right, I've taken my items out of the cart and folded it up as we ask people to do, but am still violating policy because we ask that people don't put grocery bags on adjacent seats. A couple other examples. So if I'm in one of the forward-facing seat areas, on the left I've folded my cart, I've taken my items out and put them on the seat next to me. That's technically not allowed. Picture on the right, I've left things in the cart, but the way I'm sitting here prevents people from getting to those other two rear seats on either side of me. So that violates the policy as well. And then we took a couple photos in a cutaway, smaller bus, because we do have some of these style of buses on our fixed routes. Picture on the left would be, an attempt to keep the cart out of the aisle, but I think certainly there's some concern about someone being able to reasonably control a heavy cart in this sort of setup. Picture on the right is maybe a little easier to control, but again, blocks the aisle. So we are looking at ways in future bus procurements to accommodate larger items. One of the ways to do that is to think about flip-up seats. So this time we'll start with the picture on the right. This is an existing bus that we have that a driver can flip up a set of two seats in order to create some space in front of the place where I'm sitting there. So this is actually a pretty decent solution on this type of bus, where things can remain in the cart, or if you have a stroller, but it's out of the aisleway, someone can reasonably control it. The picture on the left I included because we are, for our electric bus procurement that's upcoming, we're looking at flip-up seats like this, and perhaps flip-up seats like on the forward-facing seats that you see on the left side of this picture, having those individually flip up, would allow somebody to sit in one and have a cart next to them in the other space, and remain clear of aisleways. I also included a note on here that we haven't yet got pricing, but we might just explore, at least to understand what the cost would be for retrofit. So if we did want to install some flip-up seats in existing buses to gain some more flexible cargo area to facilitate people traveling with things like groceries, we were just going to look into how much that might cost on a per bus basis. If you think about some of our vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles are 12-year buses, so the question is, do we want to wait until our entire fleet turns over to have buses that can accommodate this sort of thing, or do we want to look at retrofit prior to that time span? So the couple of policy changes we had put forth for discussion are essentially just allowing more discretion from drivers, in talking with drivers out at the facility. I think there's a desire maybe for them to be able to gauge if it's really a problem or not, if someone is using a cart or a stroller at a given time. Certainly on a bus that's got a lot more people on it and you're trying to maneuver things around that, it can be real challenging to accommodate cart usage. But particularly during the times that we're in right now, ridership is lower. We've come upon some times, I think, when it would not have been a huge operational challenge for someone to bring a cart on board, but because of our clear policy, we've not allowed that. So these two items are, allow someone to keep things in their cart, keep things in the aisleways or partially in the aisleways, and ask them to move that if it becomes an issue. Similarly, allowing people to put bags of groceries on adjacent seats unless we get to the point where someone really does need to sit down and a grocery bag is preventing them from doing that. That's the content I had. I had posed these few prompt questions just to get thoughts from you all about allowing bus operators to have some more discretion as opposed to such a firm policy. I didn't know in your all's experience riding buses, if you've used carts before, seen other people use them, how you've observed that interaction happening, and just if anyone had other safety concerns, accessibility concerns, practicality. So all in my presentation there, I'm happy to go back to any slide or answer questions.
This is Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. Invite PTAC comments at this time or questions.
Nick Guzmiak, PTAC. I'll be the first to admit that I wasn't aware that this was even a policy. I feel like every public transit system I've been on, whether it be rail or rail or bus, nobody's really cared. I mean, as long as you're not in anybody's way, things are pretty permissive elsewhere. It's possible that they have policies that are just not enforced. It's very possible. But, I mean, yeah, the policy as it stands looks pretty restrictive in being able to tote stuff around, especially given that a lot of routes don't always run full necessarily. So it seems like kind of a relatively simple change to enact, as long as drivers are willing to have that latitude to judge whether something is truly in the way or not. Adam, are you familiar with other cities that have restrictions like this? Like, is this actually pretty common around the country?
This is Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. Almost every system is going to have a cart policy, but I think you're pretty spot on in your assessment that there's just more discretion in its implementation or in its enforcement. And I think currently our system is set up to take it pretty literally. So yeah, I think it's not uncommon for agencies to have this type of policy because the main goal is for accessibility, right? We're just trying to make sure that people can safely move about the bus, that people with walkers and wheelchairs aren't disadvantaged by, big big objects or big carts. Yeah.
August Budisel, PTAC. I just have a couple things. Just in my experience writing, the potential policy changes are essentially, I think what Nick was alluding to, they're essentially already happening because the bus ridership, even back pre-COVID, was very rarely at capacity, especially on the lines that are going to Walmart and Dillon's on Mass. Being a daily rider myself, I've never had trouble with my groceries occupying seats that were needed. I've never used a cart, but I think most bus riders, or maybe just me, I feel like I would only shop for a couple of days worth of groceries at a time anyway, because the physical requirements of getting to the bus stop, on the bus, off the bus, and home is always just awful. So I would only shop for a day or two at a time. So I think that the policy changes are basically already in effect. The only other thing, when I saw this slide show this morning, the people who are using the carts are already, and again, this is just my experience, I don't have any hard data. The people using those carts, in my experience, are the people who already have a mobility issue in the first place. I'm not so young, but I have no mobility issues, so I would just use plastic bags. The people who I consistently saw using those floral carts are usually senior citizens who already have an issue getting the cart on the bus and then trying to find a place to sit down in a somewhat expedited manner. So and the policy as it stands, I think it's fine because it's not necessarily being enforced to that point, but I loop back around. I'm sorry. I'll stop for a second.
This is Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. Do any other PTAC members have comments or questions? Hearing none, I'll go ahead since I have a couple of comments. The only possible concern that I have in terms of offering discretion to bus operators would be disparate actual implementation of the policy, that as long as operators are fairly assessing regardless of identity or characteristics of whatever person has a cart with them or groceries with them, then I'm okay with that, and I have no reason to believe that our bus operators would be discriminatory in how they implement it. And to August's point, I agree with him. I would guess that most of the people who are going to use carts are probably people who don't have the means to be able to physically carry, say, 4 or 6 grocery sacks at the same time on their own, like, say, I would be able to when I have no mobility issues. So the fact is that having this policy is anti-accessibility from that perspective, that we're trying to make it so that people who are in wheelchairs or need more room to be able to get around in the bus can do that, and we're actually limiting their ability to use the bus. So from that perspective, I'm all in favor of changing the policy to match up with our current ethic of not so much enforcement of it, except for in the rare situations where we do not have room for everyone to be able to sit down. In that case, I would guess that most people who are riding the bus would be willing to accommodate people and move around their carts so that someone can get by in a wheelchair, or someone who would otherwise have to stand can have a seat.
August Budisel, PTAC. Adam, I do have a question on the flip seats. Because I've never used the flip seats, the single seats that you use for your display. I have had multiple times I've tried to raise one of the bench seats on the smaller buses that the 7 used to use. Would the driver have to always be the one who came back and raised the seats for these carts, or is this something the rider could do?
This is Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. That's a good question. The intent is for us to move forward with the individual forward-facing flip seats so that a passenger can do it themselves. The bench seats that flip up sideways towards the window are a little more involved in their mechanism, so the driver typically has to do that. There's a few different levers and they're a lot heavier. But the intent, I think, would be to have a couple places in the bus where a passenger could real easy flip up the one next to them. And if you don't need it, flip it back down easily.
Nick Kuzmiak, PTAC. I just wanted to provide a bit of, observations from elsewhere. I do really appreciate that everybody's looking at this from an accessibility perspective, and that the assumption is that generally people with mobility issues may be more likely to use grocery carts. But I should note that in relatively dense cities where transit is much more common, it's actually pretty common for able-bodied people as well to use these things. If you're getting a gallon of milk and cat litter, I mean, even if you're a real tough guy, right, it's still kind of annoying to carry that three blocks to the rest of your destination. So I even have friends in Philadelphia who are a rugby player and in the Army, and they use it too. it's definitely for everybody, and I think though it would probably more directly benefit those with limited mobility, I think allowing to use space for carrying groceries would probably benefit everybody, really.
I hate carrying cat litter upstairs.
Yeah, and I usually buy like 30 pounds at a time, so you carry a lot more with these carts.
Mike Wazkowski, I tend to buy about 50 pounds at a time because of all of my cats, and I'm pretty fit, and I cannot do that very easily. So I sympathize with that. I see it more, when I say accessibility in this situation, I mean it is everyone needs to benefit from being accessible, whether you are otherwise able-bodied or not. That not everyone's going to be Arnold Schwarzenegger to be able to carry everything in their bare hands. Is there any other discussion from other PTAC members?
August Russo, PTAC. I just had a question. I'm not sure if First Transit is outside of like our purview of access to information. Do we have any idea what the drivers feel about cart usage, or how often they feel like they feel obligated to say something to a rider, or anything at all, really?
This is Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. Yeah, so that's actually part of the reason of bringing this forward is that, to your point about the way it's enforced or not enforced currently, I think because it's written in such a black and white way, there are some operators who read it that way and enforce it that way. There are others who might take some discretion, but writing some discretion into the policy, I think, would allow those operators who do enforce it strongly a window of light to say, oh, okay, I can use some judgment here and not just deny this person's ability to bring a cart on board. So that's kind of what I learned when I went out, and an operator walked me through their day on how they've seen carts used before, and that's when I was taking those pictures. That represents a 45-minute discussion with an operator about the variety of ways they've seen them used and challenges they've faced and that sort of thing. So we did try to tap into their knowledge and what they see out there in thinking about changes to this.
Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. Is there any other comment or questions from PTAC members? Hearing none, I would like to entertain a motion to adopt some more discretion in this policy. Would anyone so move?
And this is Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. I will say, Mike, this particular policy is an internal operations policy. It's not necessarily something we need to vote on. I think I've heard some pretty clear consensus and direction from the group that we can take moving forward, unless someone would like to speak counter to kind of what we've talked about with discretion. But I'm not sure we need to necessarily take a vote on this type of change.
Understood. Mike Laskowski, PTAC Chair. Is there anyone who supports the current policy being enforced as it is? I think there's your consensus, Adam.
Yeah.
So let's move forward with advising drivers to exercise discretion and only enforce it when an individual needs a seat or it's otherwise blocking them from being able to get around the bus.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is a bucket of other policy updates, including the discussion we had last month on fare donation policy, vehicle idle policy, as well as a nightline fare policy. Adam, would you like to start from the top on that?
Sure. Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. So yeah, we'll start with the first one, the fare donation policy. So you all had discussed our prior, we used to be called our contribution of alternate fares policy. We cleaned up the language to make it a little more straightforward. The updated fare donation policy implemented the changes that this group recommended. It was approved at City Commission on February 2nd. So we have set our first application deadline for March 1st. Also at the direction of PTAC, we reached out to all agencies and organizations that had either purchased bulk passes from us, utilized our prior contribution policy, or any organizations that we thought might be left off that list but might still benefit. We did direct email outreach to each of them to let them know of the policy update and that they may apply for passes prior to March 1st. So already gotten a handful of comments back thanking us for letting them know, and a couple that plan to submit an application. So we'll see what that looks like come March 1st. And per the policy, I would anticipate that we'll likely have more requests than we have funding or a dollar amount of free passes to offer. So we'll likely need to implement that percentage distribution that we talked about based on requests. But all of that is pretty clearly laid out in the application and the policy. So organizations should have a good idea of what they're getting into when they apply. I think there are a handful of organizations we're still trying to track down the best contact information for, but we would expect to get that in the next week or so and get word out so that organizations have time to reach out to us. Any thoughts or questions on that particular policy update? Okay.
I'll just chip in, and I'm glad that the city adopted it.
All right. So Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. The next policy update is another internal operational policy, the vehicle idle policy. So we had a request from a downtown business owner to see if our buses needed to remain idling when they were at the downtown transfer area. Spent some time discussing pros and cons of turning the buses off as opposed to letting them remain idling with the bus manufacturer, with our contractor, doing some peer review of what other cities and agencies do. Ultimately, we've changed our policy so that at all layover locations, so that would include downtown, but also would include South Iowa, 6th and Wakarusa, got a couple buses out there, bus that lays over out near the community shelter. At any layover location where a bus is going to be there for a certain amount of time waiting on its next trip, if it is laying over for more than 3 minutes, drivers are turning that bus off. We would anticipate this will save us some amount of money on gas and diesel that we'll be measuring over these next month or so and beyond to figure out what our cost savings might be there. There is a portion of this policy that allows for exceptions on particularly cold days or hot days. So, we implemented this policy February 1st and pretty quickly have implemented a lot of exception days because it's been so cold out there. And the intent really is that, we obviously don't want passengers or drivers being unsafe or really uncomfortable in the buses. And when it's as cold as it has been, it runs counter to our efforts, I think, to turn the bus off, and then we get complaints and safety issues from buses being so cold. Another challenge to that is we're cracking windows on all of our buses right now for COVID air circulation reasons. So particularly challenging to keep a bus warm during this time. So we would expect, hopefully we get through February, we get some days where it's above freezing, and we can utilize this policy more. But we think, I think there'll be some cost benefit. I think it'll be, obviously a reduction in noise, a reduction in fumes from a group of buses that's sitting idling. So with that said, any thoughts, questions, discussion on that change? All right, hearing none.
Likewise, actually, sounds like we're all in agreement with doing it that way.
Okay. All right, so the last, Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager, the last one on this list is a small change to our Nightline fare policy. So Nightline is a subscription service overnight for people to take trips door to door for $2. Our fare policy has always been that it's $2 cash. We don't make change on those buses, same as fixed route. And in our latest round of getting feedback from operators, it came up that it can be quite a challenge for both them and for passengers, especially passengers who are using Nightline pretty frequently, to always have $2 exact change to use this service. So the question was, can we create some sort of fare or pass that people can use that doesn't require them to always have exact $2 change? That was a pretty reasonable request. So we didn't create any new fare structure, but we are allowing 10-ride punch cards and single ride tickets to be used on Nightline, so long as it's an equivalent of $2. So I think that creates a little bit of flexibility for people. They can have passes in their pockets instead of always having to try to get $2 exact dollars to use this service. And we'll monitor to see if that helps how we think it might, but I thought that was good feedback from operators, and hopefully will make life just a little bit easier for people who are using Nightline. Thoughts or questions on that one?
This is Matt Blazkowski, PTAC Chair. Could you remind me how much a 10-ride punch card costs?
$10 for a full fare. There are people who have reduced fare, so those are half price, but for a Nightline service, it's got to be an equivalent $2. So even if you're using a reduced fare punch card, you still have to punch the equivalent of $2 to use Nightline service.
Okay, so it would be roughly 2 punches for a full fare one and
Correct.
4, I guess, for a reduced fare one?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
No, this is Freddie Gibb here, PTAC member. Adam, when you talked about, so the biggest problem is just people having exact change for that? Is that the biggest problem? Or is that why we're doing this policy thing? Or because would it be a consideration to allow other payment options? Maybe if that's the case, if there's other $2, like if I'm following that correctly, like maybe something through I don't know, like Venmo or something that the city can get behind that could be really simple with digital payments. If that's the case, is that the problem I'm trying to follow?
Yeah, so good question. Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager, and that is, you're very right that that will be another step we could take to make just paying for fare a lot easier, and not only on Nightline, but on any bus ride that people would take. Done some preliminary research and gotten some vendors to talk me through their products on how digital fare payments work. I think, I'd be open to the direction of PTAC as far as when we might want to move on something like that. Part of my hesitation to go full speed ahead right now on pursuing digital fare payments is that this calendar year we'll have a discussion around whether or not we might consider fare-free or different fare structures. So just thinking about that, so let me see if I can get my numbers straight here. The estimates for digital fare payments are a little interesting because there's not necessarily there's not an upfront capital cost to those. There's not subscription fees or anything like that. The way those services are funded is they take a percentage cut of any pass that's purchased through their system. So it's kind of it won't cost us any money, but it will probably lose some revenue, maybe, right? Or it'll make buying a pass easy enough that we get more people riding, and we might not actually lose a whole lot of revenue if we've got people purchasing passes and riding that wouldn't have otherwise because it was annoying to go buy a physical pass. So there's some different things to think about with that. I think in discussions with other vendors of that service, they assume a certain amount of adoption rate, right? So they don't assume that everybody who rides is going to switch to digital fares. They assume that some percentage will. And then of that percentage, they take a cut of fares that are used. So it's honestly not a huge dollar investment or potential loss in dollars. I think we're probably talking, based on initial estimates, I got like $5 or $10 grand of lost revenue if we were to go that way. I'd want to do a little more research to figure out if it really would be that low. But that's kind of a long way of saying you're absolutely right. Digital fare payments would be yet another step we could take to make paying for the bus easier. I think we just have to determine when is it the best time for us to move forward on something like that.
This is Mike Wazikowski, PTAC Chair. Since you mentioned the discussion of changing rates to potentially a fare-free policy, what would be the opportunity cost then you think of adopting this and then getting rid of it in 6 months?
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. That's an interesting question. When I go to answer it, maybe there's not as much risk as I was initially thinking, because it is not an upfront cost. It is a cost purely based on its usage. So as people are buying a pass, instead of giving us $1, we're only getting 80 cents out of them or 70 cents out of them. So we would expect to lose some amount of revenue probably whenever we would have digital fare options. But as far as adopting it and then not using it, I suppose I'd want to learn more about if there's a penalty, if there's, contract has to be a certain length or something before we can cease the service. But opportunity costs, we might explore that more.
This is Mike Wazikowski, PTAC Chair. Unless there's objection from anyone on PTAC, that would be my approach. I would advise you look into what are the costs of, say, breaking a contract with them, or if a digital fare system even requires a contract in the first place. If there is no contract whatsoever, it strikes me as kind of silly to put off adopting that for any longer than we need to if it's an an opportunity for us to make it easier for people to get the tickets that they want to spend and avoid the issues with not being able to provide exact change.
August Budiso, PTAC. And I don't want to move us farther down a rabbit hole on this because I've never used digital fare. How does the rider proof of purchase that they have a digital pass to the driver?
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. It's a good question. It's just a visual check. So not dissimilar from somebody walking in and holding up their monthly pass and the driver allows them to board. It would be a very similar thing with digital fare payment. For things like single ride tickets or one-use things, they're usually time delimited. So the user would choose, use my pass now, and then it's good for a certain period of time. So eventually it goes away. They typically have some movement to them so that people don't just screenshot a picture of a digital fare and then use it over and over and over again. So there's usually some like pulsing motion or something like that a driver could indicate like, okay, yes, this is a valid fare to be used at this time. So that's as much of that rabbit hole as I'll go down for now.
Thank you. Hey, August Budiso, PTAC. Back on the non-digital, were you suggesting that we move to using the 10-ride punch cards for Nightline, or making an entirely new one? Also, because my mind was going to the fact that a 10-punch ride would be exhausted. If they had to ride Nightline for both to and from work, it could be exhausted in a matter of days, versus if we had the 10-punch ride card plus a higher denomination so that because a lot of the people, when I use Nightline, I would use it to get to work, and I could just take the normal time bus home. So I would only need 5 Nightlines. But if someone who has, 10 Nightlines a week to get to work and back, the $10 would go very quickly.
You could buy a T-Lift.
Sure, yeah. This is Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. Yeah, I think we viewed it as a step, right? So it's the thing about the punch cards is at least you could buy multiple of them at a grocery store and at least have those with you. They would go faster, but it would still be easier than you having to procure a bunch of dollar bills. We were hesitant to create a new fare type at this time when these punch cards can function. You could use a punch card for, to your example, like a regular fixed route and Nightline, and it would just be a different number of punches. So we just saw that synergy and thought, well, that's it's nice to just use something existing as opposed to creating a new unique format. I think we're always monitoring. So if additional feedback from riders and from operators is like, hey, the punch cards are great, but it's still a problem that I have to get so many punches. If we hear issues like that, we might consider future changes, I guess, to make it better.
This is Mike Blazkowski, PTAC Chair, and ultimately that discussion is simply what does it cost to do that? And if you have to buy, say, 5 or 10 cards at a time, then you're fronting a lot more money to get those cards than if you paid $2 at a time and happen to keep $2 in your wallet every single time you needed to use the Nightline. But that's ultimately a cost of having a punch card in the end, that you have to front the money for it at some point, whether it's you're getting it a month in advance, a week in advance, or you're having to have to. Is there any other discussion from PTAC members? Questions, concerns? Okay, thank you. I believe that clears all of the other policy updates from the agenda. Next item on the agenda is if there are any future agenda or work session items to add. I'll note that if you do not have any specific agenda or work session items that you want to mention at this time, you should feel free to email Adam, myself, and Lance Fahey with any agenda work session items that you want us to consider for future meetings. I would simply advise that if you're going to email us, that you keep it limited to us three as the recipients, so that we don't risk any, so that we don't potentially run afoul of the Kansas Open Meetings Act, that you could potentially trigger a serialized meeting if you include everyone on it. So does anyone have any future agenda work session items they'd like us to consider? Okay, hearing none, we'll proceed on to other items, but I would guess that if no one had other future agenda items to add, we might not have other items we want to discuss at this time. Does anyone have any topics on public transit we want to discuss? I see Nick raising his hand.
Nick Kuzniak, PTAC. Yeah, I'll keep it relatively brief. I mentioned last time, for those who are new on PTAC, that I am a member of the Multimodal Transportation Commission. I should note that we are still short one member of a full board. So if anybody's interested in expanding their civic engagement or getting even more involved in transportation in all of its forms, then it's a pretty good board to be on. So I've been on for about 2 years now, 2.5, I think. I've even been the chair. It doesn't really take a whole lot of experience to be the chair of the board. So we cover all sorts of things, from pedestrian issues, biking, and even personal vehicle stuff as well. So if you're interested, you basically apply the same way that you applied for this board. And I don't think we've gotten a lot of applicants, so your chances are pretty good if you're interested. So just throwing that out there.
Thank you, Nick. Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. Does anyone else have something that they would like to bring to the committee's attention? Hearing none, we'll proceed on to transit staff items on the agenda. Adam or Serena, do you have anything to speak about at this time?
This is Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. Just a couple of things. So first thing is, I would like to introduce Felice Laverne, who is on the call with us this afternoon. So Felice is our new Transit Planner 2 that started with us a few weeks ago. She will do a whole lot of things for us, but a couple of big ones is she's going to help take over the bus stop improvement program and all of the analysis and outreach and planning and construction management that goes along with that, as well as will help us pursue competitive grant opportunities on an annual basis for various capital projects or technology, different things we might want to pursue with state and federal funding. So those are a couple of the big things, but she'll definitely also help with a number of the planning, analysis, public outreach work. There's a lot of stuff on our horizon with our big projects these next 2 years. So just wanted to introduce you all to her, and Felice, if you'd like to give maybe a little bit about yourself so the group knows where you're coming from.
Sure, thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation today. This was great. To introduce myself, I received my Master's of Urban and Regional Planning from the University of New Orleans in 2016, and I was most recently a transportation planner with AECOM, providing design support, interfacing with various DOTs, providing context-sensitive solutions, and public outreach expertise to major interstate projects, as well as performing data analysis and visualization. And it's a particular interest of mine to have the public at the heart of projects and to maintain a people-centered approach to planning. That's about me, and I'm coming from New Orleans. I was there for about a decade. I'm from Louisiana, but I have family in the area here, so I'm really happy to be in Lawrence. It's really nice to meet you all.
All right. Well, thank you, Felice. It's
Thank you, Felice.
good to have you on here. Did Mike or you or anybody else, did you have any questions or follow-up?
This is Mike. No, I don't have any follow-up. Just glad to have you on board and contributing to public transit in the city.
Thank you.
All right, it's Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. Just a couple of project updates I wanted to give you all. So, route redesign study this year. We are in the process of trying to work towards a professional services agreement with a consultant. We got 3 proposals that came in for that project, and are working to try to get the consultant that the panel selected signed up. So I can share more about them once we actually have a signed contract, but we're very excited with the quality of work and the experience that that group has. I would still expect the first the kickoff and the first steering committee meeting for the route redesign project to happen in March. I think we're probably still a few weeks away trying to get that agreement on the city commission agenda. Will probably not happen until early March at this point. So just something on the horizon for that group. Transit facility project, which is closely tied to route redesign. We currently have our request for qualifications out right now. It is posted through February 22nd. So we've gotten a number of questions from interested engineering and design consultants on the facility project. So we think we'll probably get a good set of proposals for that. But we'll know more about that later this month, and we'll put together a team to review those proposals and hopefully get that as aligned as we can with route redesign. Those projects will be necessarily interlinked because of the the need to understand how many bus bays we need at the facility and where routes will go, that sort of thing. And then lastly, electric buses. So we're working right now, city and KU staff working to figure out our configuration of charging equipment out at the facility. Through the application process, we defined who our vendor partner was going to be, but figuring out the exact logistics of where chargers will be sited and how our buses will operate in the yard, how they'll pull in and out, and trying to think about future expansion of more electric buses, that sort of thing. We're working through those details with our project management consultant, which is the Center for Transportation and the Environment. So that's coming along. We've also are trying to work through the contract for the buses themselves. So figuring out, exactly how we want those configured, all the way down to types of seats and types of windows and all that stuff. But working through that contract right now, and we'll hopefully in March is when I would think the Gillig bus contract would go to City Commission. So things are moving along in each of those 3 big projects. I wanted to give you a alert to that, and happy to answer any clarifying questions or thoughts about any of those topics.
This is Mike Wazakowski, PTAC Chair. Since you mentioned the contract going before the commission, I assume, would that be a part of the consent agenda?
Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. Typically, yes, especially when the commission has seen this project from when we applied to the federal government for it, when we budgeted this last year, and now from here forward, it's essentially everything we bring to them is confirmation of the budget. We told you we needed this much money. Here's the next set of funding we're going to use for this piece of the project, and explaining what that piece looks like. So a lot of that stuff doesn't merit a full presentation and agenda item for them and the work that they need to do. So typically we'll put that stuff on consent.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a comment on those items that Adam presented?
I'll go through to sell PTAC. I just had a question, Adam. Is First Transit going to stay on Timber Ridge for the foreseeable future? When you were talking about charging stations for electric buses, it just made me wonder, is installing the infrastructure and where the bus barn currently is versus where it could be?
Yeah, that's a good question. Adam Weigel, Transit and Parking Manager. So the facility out at Timber Ridge is a KU facility on KU property. It's a central part of our coordination with KU, both in our MOU for transit operations with them, as well as we maintain a lease that we actually just renewed with KU for 10 more years of service out of that facility. So that is the plan for the foreseeable future on where we will continue to jointly operate with KU using one contractor out of that one facility for maintenance and bus storage. We do, just to add a little more context to that, where our service contracts are 5-year contracts. So, we in a prior contract were with MV Transportation. We're now with First Transit. So, it's not guaranteed, I guess, through the life of our relationship with KU and using that facility that First Transit will always be the contractor working out of there. That'll depend on proposals we get every 5 years for which company is going to operate our service. But it's our intent with KU to always jointly operate out of that facility and that property.
This is Mike Wazkowski, PTAC Chair. Is there any other comments about these transit staff items? Okay, well, hearing none, that exhausts our agenda for today. The next meeting of this committee is scheduled for March 8th, second Monday, as always, of the month. So thank you very much for attending. I do not believe we need to make a formal motion to adjourn since the agenda is exhausted, but if we need to, does anyone want to offer it?
We do not need to make one, Mike.
Okay. Thank you very much for attending, everyone, and look forward to seeing you next month, the same time.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
Goodbye.